is online. First, we are going to this going is online. First, we are going to get rid of that. Okay, well, there's nobody else joining us yet, but they may indeed be joining us asynchronously on um, on YouTube. So, okay, we are back um for more Talmud. We are just trying to find our last section. Okay, we'll start here. A, and if anyone wants pizza at any time, there's pizza upstairs. I only ask you get me a slice too. Okay. We learned in the Mishnah where the sages said to recite a long blessing, and we went over last time we met the difference between a long blessing and a short blessing. Where the sages said to recite a long blessing, one may not shorten it, and vice versa. The Gemara proceeds to address a particular problem arising from conclusions drawn from the Mishnah. But before addressing the main problem, we're going to talk about a simpler secondary problem. Obviously, in a case where one took a cup of wine in his hand and thought it was beer and began reciting the blessing thinking it was beer. So that's kind of on beer, we would just say like the general, God who creates all things, through whom all things came to be, as opposed to obviously with wine, we know that we have Borei Pri Hagafen, like we have specifically the fruit of the vine, but beer isn't fruit of the vine. So that, it's so if you thought it was beer and you started saying the blessing uh uh for that, and upon realizing that it was wine, he concluded the blessing with that which is recited over wine. In other words, what happens if it says he fulfilled his obligation. It's going to say here, Yatzah, right? He's Yotze, as we say. He's Yatzah, he did it. Even though, right, if we say that there's a short blessing that's Baruch Atah Adonai, the blessing over beer is a short blessing. The blessing over wine is a long blessing. But if you started it one way and you finish it, as long as it's finished in full, you're good. Because you can't, because we'll get into the differences. That sounds obvious, maybe, but there's an important reason why we're saying that. In that case, even if he had recited by whose word all things come to be, or Shehakol Nihye Bidvaro, which is the one over beer and over many things, as he originally intended, he would have fulfilled his obligation. So he would have been Yotze, even if he'd said the thing, the beer thing, thinking it was beer, as we learned in the Mishnah. If one recited the general blessing, by whose word all things came to be, over all food items, he fulfilled his obligation after the fact, even if ab initio, or from the beginning, another blessing was instituted to recite before eating that food. Therefore, if he reconsidered and concluded the blessing with the ending of the blessing over wine, he fulfilled his obligation. However, in a case where one took a cup of beer in his hand and thought it was wine, right, and began reciting the blessing thinking it was wine, he intended to recite Borei Pri Hagafen, and upon realizing that it was beer, he concluded the blessing with that which is recited over beer. Then what's the halacha? So you're doing short, you can lengthen it, right? You can just add those words if you forget. What do you do in this case? Ostensibly, this blessing is comprised of two sections. The first section, during which he intended to recite Bore Priya Guffin, cannot fulfill his obligation as it is an inappropriate blessing to recite over beer. However, in the second section, he recited by whose word all things came to be, which is the appropriate blessing. The dilemma then is, do we follow the essence of the blessing, the first section, or do we follow the conclusion of the blessing? So which is the which part of the Chatima, which part here of our Chatima is truly the Chatima? What part is truly um the essential part? It makes you think that there's an essential part. Maybe you shouldn't think that. Maybe it's all the essential part together. Just throwing that out there. So to get something from this, they're going to pull in evidence, something to compare it to, because they can't just answer the question with their opinion. That would be inappropriate. So Tashma, come in here, proof of what was taught in a Baraita with regard to a similar case. Regarding Shacharit, Patach b'yotze or v'sayim b'ma'ariv aravim. If in the morning prayer one began the blessings prior to the recitation of the Shema appropriately with Yotzer Or and concluded with, Ma'ariv Aravim, he did not fulfill his obligation. Lo Yetza. However, if one did the opposite and commenced with who brings with Ma'ariv Aravim and concluded with Yotzer Or, he fulfilled his obligation.
So it's the end that counts.
Similarly, if in Ma'ariv Aravim, one commence or in the evening prayer, Arvit, if one again, so we were talking about in Shacharit, if you said Yotzer Or and ended with Baruch Atah Adonai Ma'ariv Aravim, no good. But if you said the words of Ma'ariv Aravim, but the Chatima, Baruch, Yotzer HaMe'arot, for Yotzer Or, that would be fine. So it does seem that the Chatima is the relevant authority on the prayer, depending on, even if you said the words of the other, the bulk words of the other prayer.
Sorry, Rabbi, Chatzima means.
Sorry, Chatima means seal or signature, and it's what we refer to as the last line of a prayer, is the Chatima. And it's generally a restatement. Baruch Atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMe'arot, Ma'ariv Aravim, Ohev Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ohev Yisrael, all these ways that we end our regular prayers are like that. Similarly, if in the evening prayer one commenced the recitation of Shema with Ma'ariv Aravim and concluded with Yotzer Or, he did not fulfill his obligation. If one commenced with Yotzer Or and concluded with Ma'ariv Aravim, he fulfilled his obligation. So again, if the Chatima is correct, it seems a little weird that you would sit here and say, "Oh, it's so great!" Like especially the morning one seems really weird because we read that prayer every Friday night, and it's like, "Who makes the evening and causes darkness to fall? Thank you, God, Creator of the heavenly lights." As long as you say that second part, the part for Yotzer Or, they're like, "Okay, that's fine." Seems a little strange, but okay. Excuse me. It's also worth noting, it's not necessarily, it's like being Yotze. This is like the minimum fulfillment. They're not saying this is the praiseworthy way for you to pray. It's just worth pointing that out. the Baraita summarizes that the general principle is everything follows the conclusion. Or here, Hakol holech achar hachitun. So everything follows the Chatima. Based on this principle, the question with regard to a blessing recited over food and drink posed above can be resolved. Yeah.
Why does a Baraita contain authority? What makes it authoritative?
It's not any more authoritative or less authoritative than any other piece of rabbinic material, but Baraitot have and again, like I mock them for this a little bit, because I'm very irreverent. But sometimes they're like mystical, magical Baraitot that come out of nowhere and they just happen to say exactly what the rabbi needs it to say.
Yeah.
It's not that they're like everyone has to follow this Baraita, but a Baraita is evidence. And it's like saying, well, why in every murder case are they using a gun as evidence? It's like, well, was the murder done by a gun? If it was, then that's probably why, because that's often the evidence in murder trials. In this case, Baraitot are the common form of evidence in rabbinic argument.
Is the thinking sort of, this issue has been carefully thought of before, and here's what was thought?
Yes, I mean, the idea is basically, how did we get into that? Like, look at the argument for how we got into this. We heard this Baraita with Tashma. Before we had Tashma, there was a question. It said that we had specifically, it said, here's a case. And we know that in this case, it is that that it says you fulfill if you say the by whose word all things, I keep doing the shakol nihye bidvaro. If you say shakol nihye bidvaro, we know that works as a general catch-all. So we don't have a principle for which we say this works. Does the other work? If you did it the other way, we don't know. And so the Gemara asks a question. Where we say, let me see where it is. So we say, Batari kar bracha azlinan o batar chatima azlinan. Like, do we follow the ikar, the essence of the bracha or the chatima? Like, think about it in the Hebrew instead of in the terms of like the essence or the conclusion. Like, that's not. Do we follow the bracha or do we follow the chatima? If you mix and match the bracha and the chatima, what happens? We don't have a general principle necessarily, and so they say, well, this rabbi, whoever in this baraita, wrote about this.
Yeah. Okay.
And so again, now you're getting into also like Yudah Nasi or whoever we want to say the redactor is making choices. They make choices about the Gemara makes choices about which Braitot are most applicable to the Mishnah, keeping in mind that this Baraita may have been written as a response to Mishnah. That's the whole Gemara. That's why people say in shorthand, Gemara comments on the Mishnah, because the Mishnah existed. And some of these things some Baraitot may exist from before the Mishnah is at least codified, if not being prepared. But the Gemara then, with both the formed Mishnah and the general atmosphere around what's happening, says, well, but what do we think? What did these other rabbis think? Let's bring in more voices. Let's bring in more stuff. And so that's where you bring in all the Baraitot. So here they're like, well, what's the answer? Tashma, come in here. A proof, essentially, is what they're saying. Come in here, Baraita, and in this Baraita, it says about the morning prayer and the evening prayer. Okay, so that's all the Baraita says. The Baraita doesn't come in saying, "Behold my authority." The Baraita just says, "Hey, I had this idea," and whoever proposed it said, "This rabbi had an idea, and it seems like it's a good answer for our thing." Often, it's worth recognizing the Gemara doesn't accept Baraitot. It will reject them. So here, let's see what we see. So it says, so the Baraita says, the Baraita is saying that the general principle we're looking for is that the Chatima is all that matters. And then what do we get? This proof is rejected. There, in one case, in the case of the blessing recited over the radiant lights, i.e. Yotzer Or, it is different, as one recites, Baruch Yotzer HaMe'orot. Blessed is the one who forms the heavenly lights. And similarly, in the evening, one recites Baruch Atah Adonai HaMa'ariv Aravim. Since these are long blessings that conclude with a second blessing summarizing their content, one can assert that everything follows the conclusion. You could. However, in the case of short blessings, such as She'akol Nihye Bidvaro, which again, you just say that, right? You're about to eat and you say that. Or you could say motzi too, is another one, right? Baruch atah Adonai. Well, you do say Eloheinu melech haolam, but you'll probably find it's still a short blessing. Bo'ima, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Done. Those are short blessings. This is a long blessing. Why? Because we started Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Different things. We used to say, Ma'ariv Aravim, all the different things we say, and then we summarize again with a chatima at the end. So they're saying they're not the same. However, in the short case of the short blessings, like this, or with Borei Pri Hagafen, ostensibly, if there's a problem with the first part of the blessing, the entire blessing is nullified. Does that make sense? Why is this Baraita suck? Because we're not comparing like with like. The Baraita is talking about two long blessings, where you could say the bracha and the chatima separate. But Borei Pri Hagafen doesn't have a chatima. It's its own chatima. It's a short, not a long blessing, like Ma'ariv Aravim and Yotzer Or. Same with She'akol Nihye Bidvaro. It's a short blessing. You just say Baruch atah Adonai, maybe Eloheinu melech haolam, and then that. So if you're mixing and matching, how do you do that? Like it's too short for that, is what. So they're like, yeah, okay. The distinction between the blessing recited over the radiant lights and the blessings recited over food and drink stems from the assumption that the conclusion, Baruch Yotzer HaMe'orot, is a complete independent blessing. However, this is not necessarily so. This works out well according to Rav, who said any blessing that does not include mention of God's name is not considered a blessing. And since Yotzer Or includes God's name, it constitutes a complete independent blessing. Remember, we just saw in Steinsaltz's up here where it says this, the Talmud doesn't know he just said that. So he's giving you that like previously, or he's giving you the intro, even if he's telling you it's not going to work. What they're saying is not going to work out. So just don't assume that it's telling you that it's going to work out exactly that way. Oh no, it lost our place. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know what happened when I.
And so the guy had sent it, and each side of the has a set, like determine if they go like.
All computers are possessed by
They
demonic
are.
forces, right?
Could be. Okay, I found it. I think yeah, I don't know. I think I found it. Okay.
Yeah, according to.
Yeah. Okay. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said any blessing that does not include mention of God's sovereignty, either Melech HaOlam, for instance, is not considered a blessing, what can be said to distinguish between the conclusion of the blessings over food and drink and the blessing over Yotzer Merot. Since the conclusion, the Chatimah of Yotzer Or does not mention God's sovereignty, it does not conclude a complete independent blessing. So if it says Baruch Atah Adonai, but it doesn't say Eloheinu Melech Haolam, then Yochanan says that's not a complete blessing, which would invalidate the separation argument,
Mhm.
that they're two separate things. The Gemara responds, rather, Rabbi Yochanan also holds that the blessing over the radiant lights is a complete blessing. Since Rabbah Bar Ula said, who creates darkness, Uvarei Choshech, is mentioned during the day, and rolling away the light before the darkness is mentioned in Ma'ariv Aravim, right? You've heard me say that at services, who rolls away dark, right? So dark, he's like, well, darkness is mentioned in the evening one, and light is mentioned or light is mentioned in the morning one, and darkness is mentioned in the morning one. Right, in order to mention the attribute of day at night and the attribute of night in the day, the beginning of the blessing in which God's sovereignty is mentioned, day and night, is appropriate to both day and night. And when one recites the blessing with God's name and mentions God's sovereignty at the beginning of the blessing, it refers to both day and night. Therefore, no proof can be cited from the blessing over Yotzer or to the blessings recited over food and drink. So they're saying there's just too much, these are not the same. These two blessings actually have properties of each other, in each other. They're so different from the food and drink blessing you're trying to set a principle for. Remember, that's why we started with all this. That you just can't do that. Okay, so the Gemara is like, I got another idea. Tashma, come and hear my new idea. So it says, I come here another solution based on what we learned in the latter clause of that Baraita. They said, in fact, we can learn something from that Baraita. Which is where it says the general principle is everything follows the conclusion of the blessing. Remember, what does the phrase the general principle is come? What does to include mean? Says, does it not come to include the case that we stated that both in the case of a long blessing and the case of a short blessing, the conclusion of the blessing is a determining factor? Oh, the instance of wine and beer. Okay, that. So they're gonna come and say, look, I think this phrase of the idea that everything, the conclusion, the Hatima is the soul of it matters. I think where it's going is, look, short or long, regardless, if you say the right words in the end, what does it matter? So the Gemara rejects this. It says that's not a principle that you haven't proven that principle applies to what you're talking about. This principle is cited to include a case of bread and dates. I don't know. The Gemara clarifies, what are the circumstances of the dilemma with regard to the blessing on these food items? If you say that it is a case where one ate bread and thought that he ate dates and commenced reciting the blessing thinking it was dates, then upon realizing that it was bread, he concluded the blessing with that which is recited over bread. Isn't that our dilemma? So yes, but we don't have a principle for that. It's like, okay, let's say that it includes this. They're like, okay, let's say that. We still don't have a principle to say if you said, I don't even know. You don't have an underlying principle. You have this thing, we're talking about these drinks, and they said, well, let's also bring in bread and dates. And they said, Okay, we can agree that that's a similar problem, I guess, to what we're discussing, but you didn't, that's not evidence. That's just you saying, say the blessing correctly, which I guess is true, but not something we need to put in the Talmud. The Gemara answers no. Lo tzricha, it's not needed. This general principle is only necessary to teach a special case where one ate dates and thought that he ate bread. Not both ways, just one. And commenced reciting the blessing, thinking they were bread. I've never eaten a date and thought it could be bread before. I think they're very different. Although they could be talking like date cakes or something, which would be a little more similar to bread of the time. In that case, he fulfilled his obligation, as even had he concluded the blessing with that which is recited over bread, he would have fulfilled his obligation. What is the reason that he concluded with the blessings recited over bread? What's the reason he would have fulfilled his obligation to recite a blessing over bread dates by saying a blessing over bread? Let me fix that sentence for you all. Sometimes the Steinsaltz sentences are written in a very New York Jewish Yoda-ish, like, what you mean with me already? And it's like, okay, great, but like, let's make it English. This is because dates also provide a person's sustenance. That is a shocking thing to say, and we're probably not gonna. But that is fascinating that that's where they're going. You can say it because dates also provide sustenance. It says, while ab initio, one should not recite the blessing for bread over dates. So you shouldn't do it, is what the Gemara is saying. After the fact, if one did so, he fulfills the obligation. It is with regard to this particular situation that the Baraita established the principle, everything follows the Hatima. So where did this principle from that Baraita come from? This. It didn't come from some general principle that rabbi was writing about, that it should apply to every Hatima, where you can say any blessing you want, and any Hatima you want, and the Hatima is all that matters. No, what it meant was specifically about this dates and bread situation, in which someone would say the blessing over bread when they ate dates. And because, we're bringing lechem min haaretz, since lechem sometimes also has a meaning of sustenance, they're saying because you're mezuman, right? You're giving yourself sustenance. If one did so, even though you're not supposed to, you fulfilled your obligation, because they're trying to make sure you can fulfill mitzvot. It is with regard to this particular situation that the Baraita established the principle, everything follows the Chatima. Ultimately, the dilemma regarding a blessing with an inappropriate opening and appropriate conclusion remains unresolved. This is one of those cases where the Gemara just doesn't resolve itself, doesn't have a, this is what you do, this is what we decided, we didn't decide. Leaves us to do some deciding for ourselves. And then the Gemara proceeds to discuss the formula for the blessings recited along with Shema. And so we're going to go back to Shema. Rabbi Bar Chinana Sava said in the name of Rav, one who did not recite Emet Yatziv at the beginning of the blessing of redemption that follows Shema, right? We went over this before. The blessing of redemption isn't just Michamocha, Emet Yatziv, which in our evening prayer book does come before, or Emet Yatziv is in the morning, I think, and Emet V'Emunah is in the evening. But we have it. It's part of the redemption prayer that all that's together. And you would start with Emet V'Emunah or Emet V'Yatziv, and then do Michamocha, and then do that Chatzima we do there. V'ne'emar ki v'ad Adonai et Yaakov v'galo mi'ad chazak mimenu. Right, Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. Blessed are you, Adonai, Redeemer of Israel. So that's the whole blessing. Just so you're not like, whoa, where's Micha Mocha? It's in there, but it's not that big a deal to most people. So one who did not recite Emet V'Yatziv at the beginning of the blessing of redemption that follows Shema in the morning prayer, and Emet V'Emunah in the evening prayer did not fulfill his obligation. An allusion to the difference in formulation between morning and evening is, as it is stated, to declare your kindness in the morning and your faith in the nights. So, since the Psalms say you should declare your kindness in the morning and your faith at night, you should say Emet V'Yatziv in the morning and Emet V'Emunah at night. And that's how you do it. So they're saying if you just say Micha Mocha and that thing, you actually didn't fulfill your obligation. You have to say Emet V'Yatziv in the morning and Emet V'Emunah in the evening. At least that's what Rabbah bar Hinana Sava said in the name of Rav. So if you hold with him. And he has more to say. And Rabbah bar Hinana Sava said in the name of Rav, one who is praying, when he bows in the appropriate places, you've seen there are different times where we bow. He bows when he says, blessed, and when he subsequently stands upright. He stands upright when he says God's name. Now, we all know what we're talking about, yes? We're talking about the Amidah, right? We start, Baruch atah Adonai, right? We stand up before Adonai. Why? It says. He subsequently stands upright. He stands upright when he says God's name. Baruch atah Adonai. It's teaching you how to do the correct huckle and shuckling. If you don't do it right, it's not good. It's not like a regulation necessarily, but it says that it says this is the way one prays when he's praying. That's just what one does. Shmuel, who was Rav's colleague and significantly outlived him. So this guy was teaching something Rav taught him many years ago. Shmuel, who used to hang out with Rav, who's still alive, said, what is Rav's reason for saying that one should stand upright at the mention of God's name? The reason being, again from the Psalms, Diktiv, Adonai zokef kefufim, right? We say that also in some of our prayers, right? Where we offer, these are the things that God is in our morning blessings when we praise God for clothing the naked and healing the sick and freeing the captive. One of the things we bless God for is for being zokef kefufim, for being the one who straightens the bent. And so since God is the one who raises the fallen or the bowed or the bent, one stands upright at the mention of God's name to recall that it's God who raises the who's okefs the kefufim. Yes, what's up before the Gemara raises an objection?
Okay.
Even though we know this is true, but yeah. Because we still do it today.
I really struggle with all of this.
Sure.
You've said many times that what the rabbis try to do so assiduously is make sure no stumbling block is placed in front of someone. I think they're creating multiple stumbling blocks.
That's interesting. Why?
Because there's a right way to do it, and no matter what your intention, no matter the holiness of your heart, no matter your kavanah, if you don't stand up at the right time, or if you happen to say the wrong phrase, you haven't fulfilled your obligation.
That's not what this says. Hold on, I gotta stop you there.
Okay, good.
This, there's a different thing. So it says, there is a thing about, he does say, if you didn't say the right prayers, then you didn't, in other words, he's saying some people might do Micha Mocha and then say that blessing, and quite frankly, sometimes that's us. Sometimes I do the reading sometimes beforehand for Emet V'Emunah, which would therefore make us all Yotzei in the mitzvah. But he's saying a lot of people might do Michamocha and the Chatima and not do Emet Emunah or Emet V'Yatziv. And he's saying you can't do that. But and he says that doesn't fulfill your obligation if you don't say the whole thing. That's not a stumbling block. That is, you got to say the thing. Like it's kind of like it's because that's the slope the rabbis are afraid of. Because what's to say someone can't say the Shema is when I say I really love God and my family. That's now the Shema. They're like, no, there are words, you got to say them. It's not, so the words are firm, but it does not say here that then it says one who is praying when he bows when. So that's just telling you how to do it, but it is not saying that it is not effective if you don't bow.
Yeah.
The bowing is not an essential part of the prayer, not required for its efficacy, for being miyatzah, for being yotze in the commandment. That's just like if you want to be an extra on the inside kind of Jew, this is the right way to do it. This is the guide. He's just giving you he's like, hey, Lorne, if you want to look like the other Jews, this is what we're going to be doing. So like, if you want to do it right, you can do it like us. If you just want to stand there and say the words, then you're yotze. Judaism, the rabbis are trying to make it easy to be yotze, but they understand that there is something praiseworthy, not about taking stringencies on yourself, but about doing something in intentional or beatific ways. The rabbis invent the idea of chidor mitzvah, the idea that by beautifying a mitzvah, you increase its power, something about it. Not that it's better for you than others, but like there's a deeper level there when you beautify it. So that's why we have silver candlesticks and we don't just light tea lights in aluminum every week. That's why we bake a beautiful challah. We don't just grab literally a loaf of white bread at the store. You could, it's bread. I mean, technically for challah, you're supposed to remove and burn part of it. But if you could make white bread like that and do that, and technically you could be yotze. Is that the way we want to do it? No, that's not the way we teach people to do it. We teach them to make a beautiful braided bread. But they could make a loaf of white bread. So there's the difference. He's not saying about the shuckling and whatnot, that if you don't do that, you didn't do Jewish. He's saying, no, you still did. But if you want to know what we're doing and why we're doing it, we're bowing at this point, but then raising up because God says to Zokef the Kifufim. He's just telling you what they do. They don't want you to struggle, but they do need you to like push for something. They don't want a stumbling block, but it's not an escalator either. You understand? You get it? Like it doesn't move you for yourself. You still got to walk, right? You still got to do stuff. Halacha is a path. It's not a moving sidewalk. And it's you gotta do it yourself. But they don't want it to be so prohibitive. Yeah. Does any of that make sense?
It makes great sense. I still struggle.
That's fine.
The struggles are my problem.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
I can certainly understand the halacha is precious to the rabbi, and I can understand why they want to say this is what's meant and not anything that you might just think of. I understand that. And yet, on the other hand, there's a piece of me that says, and this is arrogant, and I understand it's arrogant because I can't speak for God, but yet I think to myself, if God sees my heart in the right place, if I'm trying to say thank you, I recognize you and I'm grateful to you, I'm not sure it matters tremendously. Did I say these right words? Or did I have the right approach to God.
This is where, again, I'm on the internet, so I shouldn't say this, but, your ecumenical friends have gotten to you, Lauren. Unfortunately, we ain't Christians. I'm just gonna come out and say it. Intention isn't everything. It's not. It's only 50, you only get 50% credit for intention. In Judaism, in Christianity, it's everything. It's the whole heart, everything about the heart, but we're not them, right? They not like us, as Kendrick is saying. That reference definitely doesn't fly in this space, but like, they can do that if they want. We believe it's Keva 50, Kavanah 50. The words of our tradition are holy and intentional and on purpose. They are their own intention. Ignoring them is saying the intention of thousands of years of Jewish history doesn't matter. Not that you, I'm not saying you're saying that, but like, what I'm saying is that for Judaism, that's what we say, is that the 50% that's Keva isn't just words. These words are special because of what they mean to the Jewish people, what they have, how they've come to be found in our prayer books. I urge also for any, I mean, we'll keep also looking over, when we look over prayer books, we see this. Liturgy is extremely important in Judaism. It's why we struggle over translation. It's why we struggle over what makes it in ways that I don't think Christians do. Because I don't think liturgy matters that much to them. The Catholics, maybe. I gotta be honest, I don't know that many. But it's like God cares about what we're feeling. Yeah. But I feel like it's like, imagine you're a college professor. You have a student who asks great questions every day. They care about the material. They come in for the test and they hand you back something that just says, I believe this is important. And you go, wait a second, I'm teaching you math or philosophy even, or psychiatry. You seem to have a really good grasp on the importance of what we're doing here, and you care very deeply. Why don't you know anything? Why haven't you learned anything? And you go, well, it's really all about what's in the heart. You go, no, you're prescribing medicine. It's important to know these things. Like here, and so we're like, this is God. This isn't us faffing about in our backyard. It's too important to make up the words on your own. It's too important. That's how the rabbis see it. So the keva, the written word, is half credit, full 50% credit. It represents the kavanah of thousands of generations of Jews. Or of
God's
thousands.
prescription.
Right. You could see, I mean, it's an interesting way of thinking about it. And it's like, without kavanah, I'd make the same loud thing. If somebody came in here and said, well, the words are right there on the page. The words really show the meaning and depth of Jewish history and culture. Why does it matter what I feel when I say them? I'd say I'd have the same fiery response for them. It's equally 50% on both sides. Someone who says, I don't need to have perfect kavanah if I can do every buckle and shuckle and I know that you bow for modim anachnu lach and sha'atahu for all 5 words, and then you stand up, and then at the end it's like, I'm glad you know all that. I'm glad you can do the Amidah and like, boo, 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 boo. We had to get out of our first year of rabbinical school, you had to be able to do a perfect like daven, a perfect Amidah, so that you could lead people in an Amidah. And to pass that, all I had to do was know the words. And it was easier to have no kavanah when you said them. But you don't get credit for that. You know what I mean? You get school credit for that, but you don't get real credit for that. You need the kavanah. It's important. It's just as important as the words.
May I
Yeah.
be a bit problematic?
Yeah, push back.
One step further.
Yeah.
No, you make very, very good sense with what you say. But how many of us in this congregation do everything just like the Talmud is saying? Does that mean that we're not practicing Judaism?
No. Well, first of all, do everything exactly the way the Talmud says. I can't imagine there is anyone in this synagogue who does everything exactly the way the Talmud says, or who follows halacha. That being said, there are different ways of being Jewish. There are different expressions of Judaism, and certainly Jews individually, as we believe as Reform Jews, pick up the mitzvot that they are capable of doing. We encourage Jews to pick up as many mitzvot as they can. I, I would never say that the people here aren't practicing Judaism, but I'm the rabbi. My job is to tell you what the right answer is, especially when it comes to how you do Judaism. I would tell you very clearly, you can do what you like. It's your informed individual choice. That's why we're Reformed Jews. I believe very strongly in that. And if you come to me and say prayer is all about what I feel, or prayer is all about what's on the page, I'm going to disagree. I'm going to come in and say that's not what we do. Now, that doesn't mean you have to change anything. That doesn't mean you have to agree with me either. But that's where I come from when I offer these opinions, is that we're trying to take Judaism seriously. I'm trying to make sure we're thinking about it. We can't reform anything if we don't have a firm basis in where we come from.
Yeah.
And part of the problem with Reform Judaism today is davka that, precisely that. Is that we lose the basis, the traditional basis from which we are reforming, and then we're reforming reforms that we don't even remember where they come from. And so I'm trying to keep us anchored in tradition.
And I'm extremely grateful to you for that. That's why I'm here. I want
Sure,
to know
of
what my
course.
roots are and.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
on the other hand, I hear this, I read this, I think about it, and I say to myself, what a failure I am.
No. Here's the thing. I wouldn't think about it as failure. First of all, I should go back and remind everyone, this wasn't written with the idea that all Jews everywhere would do it. This was written with the idea that the rabbis, and essentially originally a couple of close friends who basically just sat around talking about this, who had no idea it would become the basis for Jewish law, wrote down what they thought. And then their students wrote down what they thought about what their teachers thought, or said it, and eventually people started writing it down. And that's how we end up with this. You can make a case against Keva if you want, a Jewish case. I'm happy to hear it if you'd like. As long as it doesn't end up sounding like the Sermon on the Mount. That I would not like to hear. This is the problem we run into a lot, especially around prayer. People in this country really think about prayer in a Christian lens. I've never felt applied to Judaism. I've never felt that the Christian lens of like prayer is like relationship, like we're speaking to God and we're like forming a conduit between ourselves. It's not, we are in relationship with God, but we're always in relationship with God. Moments of prayer are moments of our seeking. They're not conduits. They're moments of gratitude, they're moments of seeking, but they're our moments. It's very complicated. Prayer is a lot of different things to different people. And I'm not trying to say, for the record, that it's got to be X or it's got to be Y. But I think there's a lot of wisdom in being guided by the liturgy that we have created.